My brother lied and told everyone I was infertile. His wife found out his secret vasectomy. My husband Tom and I had been married for 2 years and weren't in any rush to have kids. We wanted to travel, save money, buy a house first, normal couple stuff. My brother Keith and his wife Ashley had been married for 5 years, and Ashley was desperate for a baby. She talked about it constantly, had a nursery already decorated, tracked her ovulation like it was her job. Keith always seemed uncomfortable when she brought it up, but would nod along and say they were trying. At every family gathering, Ingrid would corner me and Tom about when we were giving her grandchildren. I'd say we were focusing on our careers right now, and she'd launch into speeches about biological clocks and how she wanted grandbabies while she was young enough to enjoy them. Then suddenly the pressure stopped. Like completely stopped. Ingrid started patting my hand sympathetically at dinners, my aunts would whisper when I walked by, and my cousin offered me her therapist's number for dealing with difficult medical news. I had no idea what was happening until my sister-in-law pulled me aside at Easter and said she was so sorry about my infertility issues. I asked what she was talking about. She said Keith had told everyone that I'd confided in him about not being able to have children, and that's why Tom and I were throwing ourselves into work, to distract from the pain. I was stunned. I'd never told Keith anything like that because it wasn't true. We'd never even tried for kids yet. When I confronted Keith, he got defensive and said he was just trying to help me. He said the family pressure was clearly getting to me, and he figured if they thought I couldn't have kids, they'd leave me alone. He acted like he'd done me this huge favor. I told him to tell everyone he was wrong immediately. He said he couldn't do that now. It would make him look like a liar. He actually said it would be easier if I just went along with it. Tom was furious when I told him. His parents had apparently been told too, and his mother had been crying about never having grandchildren from us. But then I noticed something weird. All the sympathy and attention I was supposedly getting was actually redirected pretty quickly to Keith and Ashley. Ingrid would say things like, at least Keith and Ashley could still give her grandchildren. They should try harder. Maybe they should see a specialist. All the family focus on babies shifted entirely to them. Ashley ate it up, talking about their plans, showing everyone her ovulation apps, discussing fertility treatments they were considering. Keith would just sit there looking more and more uncomfortable. 6 months into this lie, Ashley announced at Thanksgiving that they were starting IVF after Christmas. Keith went white. Ashley explained they'd been trying so hard with no success, and the doctor said IVF was their best chance. Ingrid offered to help pay. My dad said they'd be wonderful parents. Everyone was so supportive. Keith excused himself to the bathroom and didn't come back for 20 minutes. After dinner, Keith pulled me outside and begged me to say Tom and I were also doing IVF, so the attention would split between us. I laughed in his face and said absolutely not. He said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. That's when he broke down and told me the truth. Keith had gotten a vasectomy the year before he married Ashley. He never wanted kids but knew Ashley did, so he figured he'd just blame fertility issues when she didn't get pregnant. When the family started pressuring me about kids, he saw an opportunity to shift focus and make me the infertile one so no one would question why Ashley wasn't pregnant yet. He'd been telling Ashley they should just keep trying naturally while secretly knowing it was impossible. I told him he was disgusting for lying to his wife for 5 years. He said I didn't understand. Ashley would divorce him if she knew. He'd been hoping she'd eventually give up on kids, but instead she was getting more desperate. Now she wanted to do IVF and he'd have to come clean or the doctors would expose him. I said that wasn't my problem. 2 weeks later, Ashley called me sobbing. She'd gone to the fertility specialist alone to get a head start on tests. The doctor found nothing wrong with her and said they'd need to test Keith. Keith had tried to refuse, saying they should just try a few more months naturally first. Ashley got suspicious and went through their insurance records online. She found the vasectomy procedure 6 years ago, a full year before their wedding. Ashley also told everyone the truth at Christmas dinner. She stood up with a glass of wine and said she wanted to thank Keith for 5 years of lying about trying for a baby when he'd been sterile the whole time. She announced that I wasn't infertile, had never been infertile, and Keith had made it up to cover his own lies. She pulled out the insurance documents and passed them around the table. Ingrid read them and started screaming at Keith. Her voice got louder with each word, asking how he could do this to Ashley, how he could lie for 5 whole years. Roger put his hand on her shoulder and tried to get her to sit down, but she shook him off. She wanted answers, and she wanted them now. Keith just sat there with his head in his hands while everyone stared at him. Ashley stayed in her seat with that wine glass still in her hand. She looked calm, almost happy, like she'd been carrying this secret around and now it was finally out in the open. The insurance papers kept moving around the table. Uncle Mark read them and passed them to Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda gasped and handed them to Sabina. Everyone's face showed the same shocked look when they saw the date on those documents. Kira caught my eye from across the table and her face went red. She looked down at her plate like she wanted to disappear. Keith pushed his chair back and stood up. He mumbled something about needing air and headed for the door. Roger moved fast for someone his age and got to the doorway first. He told Keith he wasn't leaving until he explained himself. Keith tried to go around him, but Roger spread his arms wide and blocked the whole doorway. The papers made it back to Ingrid and she read them again, slower this time, like she was hoping the words would change. They didn't. She looked at Keith with tears in her eyes and asked him why. Keith opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Kira was still staring at her plate, probably remembering that time she offered me her therapist's number for my fake medical problems. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I made myself stay standing. Tom grabbed my hand and squeezed it. I looked around the table at all these people who'd been treating me like I was broken for months. I told them what Keith had done to me. I explained how he made up the whole story about my infertility to cover his own lies. I said he used me as a shield, so nobody would question why Ashley wasn't getting pregnant. Tom kept holding my hand while I talked. I told them about the months of sad looks and whispered conversations. I told them about Tom's mom crying because she thought we couldn't have kids. I explained how we'd never even tried for a baby yet because we weren't ready. Keith had invented this whole medical condition for me just to take the pressure off himself. Several people around the table started talking at once. Sabina said she couldn't believe it. Uncle Mark asked Keith if this was true. Aunt Linda just kept shaking her head. Ashley set her wine glass down on the table. The room got quiet when she stood up. She looked at Keith and her voice came out steady and clear. She said she was staying at her sister's house tonight and Keith shouldn't bother coming home. She picked up the insurance papers and folded them carefully. Then she walked toward the door and Roger stepped aside to let her through. She held her head up high like she was walking into a better life instead of away from a terrible one. Ingrid jumped up and followed her. So did Sabina and Aunt Linda. Kira looked at me one more time before she got up and went after Ashley too. About half the people at the table left to make sure Ashley was okay. The front door opened and closed several times. Keith just stood there watching his wife leave with half the family following her. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before I even got out of bed. Text after text came through. Aunt Linda apologized for treating me like I had fertility problems. Uncle Mark said he was sorry for believing Keith's lies. Sabina sent a long message about how she should have asked me directly instead of listening to gossip. Even people I barely knew from Tom's side of the family were reaching out. They all wanted to know if Tom and I were actually planning to have kids, or if we just weren't ready yet. I answered each message the same way. I told them we weren't ready for kids yet, but it was our choice, not because of any medical reason. I explained that we wanted to travel and save money first. Some people seemed relieved. Others seemed confused, like they couldn't understand why anyone would wait to have babies if they could. Tom read the messages over my shoulder while we drank coffee. He said at least now everyone knew the truth. 3 days after Christmas, my phone rang with Keith's number. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious what he'd say. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't slept. He begged me to talk to Ashley for him because she wouldn't answer any of his calls. He said she'd blocked his number and he didn't know what to do. I actually laughed. I told him I was the last person who would help him after what he did to both of us. He started making excuses about the pressure and how he panicked. I didn't let him finish. I said he lied to his wife for 5 years and used me to cover it up. Then I blocked his number and deleted the call from my history. Tom asked who it was, and I told him. He said good riddance. A week later, Ashley texted asking if we could meet for coffee. I said yes right away. We met at the coffee shop near the mall on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked tired, but better than I expected. She ordered a latte and I got a cappuccino. We sat in the corner away from other people. Ashley apologized for not questioning Keith's story about my infertility sooner. She said she should have known something was wrong when he kept avoiding the fertility doctor. We talked for over an hour about everything Keith had done to both of us. She called us Keith's victims, and I realized that's exactly what we were. He'd used both of us for his own lies. Before we left, Ashley told me she was filing for divorce. She said there was no chance of getting back together, not after 5 years of lies. I told her I was glad she found out the truth. She said she was too, even though it hurt. That night, Ingrid called me. I could hear her crying before she even said hello. She apologized for all the baby pressure she'd put on me over the years. She said she made assumptions instead of listening to what Tom and I actually wanted. Her voice broke when she said she was ashamed of how she treated me. She asked how she could make things right. I thought about it for a minute. Then I told her she could start by respecting that Tom and I would decide our own timeline for kids without family input. She agreed immediately. She promised she wouldn't bring it up again unless we did first. Roger got on the phone and said he was proud of me for standing up to Keith and telling everyone the truth. He said Keith needed to learn that actions have consequences. 2 weeks after Christmas, Ashley called me with an update. Her lawyer had just served Keith with divorce papers. The papers said fraud and emotional abuse as the reasons for divorce. Keith tried to fight it at first. He called Ashley's lawyer and said she was overreacting. But Ashley's lawyer had copies of the insurance documents showing the vasectomy date. The lawyer also had a timeline of all Keith's lies written out in detail. Keith's own lawyer looked at the evidence and told him to settle. There was no way to defend what he'd done. Ashley said Keith's lawyer advised him that if they went to trial, everything would become public record. Everyone in town would know what he did. Keith agreed to settle, but he wasn't happy about it. Ashley sounded relieved when she told me this. She said she just wanted it over so she could move on with her life. 3 days after Ashley told me about the divorce papers, I heard the doorbell ring around 9 in the morning. Tom was working from home that day. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard him open the front door. Keith's voice carried through the house asking if I was home. Tom said I was busy and Keith should leave. Keith pushed back, saying he needed to talk to me about something important. Tom's voice got harder. He said Keith wasn't welcome here after what he did. Keith started talking faster, saying he just needed 5 minutes, that he could explain everything if I'd just listen. Tom cut him off and said the only thing Keith needed to do was get off our property. Keith tried again, his voice getting desperate. He said the divorce was going too far, that Ashley was being unreasonable, that if I would just talk to her lawyer and explain that he'd only lied to help me with family pressure, maybe they could work something out. I walked to the front door and stood next to Tom. Keith looked awful. His hair was messy, his shirt was wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He saw me and his whole face changed, like he thought I'd save him. I asked him if he seriously thought I'd help him after he made everyone believe I was infertile to cover up his own lies. He started talking about how the family pressure was real and I should understand that. Tom stepped forward and told Keith he had 10 seconds to leave before Tom called the police. Keith looked between us like he couldn't believe what was happening. He said we were supposed to be family. Tom started counting down from 10. Keith backed up off the porch, still trying to talk, saying this wasn't fair, that everyone was turning on him. Tom got to 3 and pulled out his phone. Keith finally walked to his car and drove away. Tom closed the door and locked it. He asked if I was okay. I said yes, that Keith just figured out nobody was going to rescue him from what he'd done. 2 days later, Sabina called me. She said she'd run into Keith at the grocery store that morning. He was in the cereal aisle looking at boxes like he couldn't figure out what to buy. Sabina said she almost didn't recognize him because he looked so bad. His clothes didn't match. His face was pale and he moved like someone who hadn't slept in days. She asked if he was all right, and he just stared at her for a few seconds before walking away without answering. Sabina said she felt bad for him for about 2 seconds before remembering what he'd done. She also told me that Keith's friend group was falling apart. His best friend from college had told people at their gym what Keith did to Ashley and me. Now none of them wanted anything to do with him. Sabina heard from someone else that Keith got uninvited from a weekly poker game he'd been going to for 3 years. His reputation in the community was completely destroyed. Everyone who heard the story thought he was disgusting for lying to his wife for 5 years and using me as a cover. Sabina said people were talking about it at the coffee shop, at the gym, everywhere. Keith had become the guy everyone pointed to as an example of what not to do. A week later, Ashley called with another update. Her lawyer had been going through all the financial records for the divorce. They found something that made everything worse. 6 years ago, right around the time Keith got the vasectomy, he'd taken $3,000 out of their joint savings account. The withdrawal slip just said medical procedure. Ashley never questioned it at the time because Keith told her he needed a minor surgery, and his insurance would reimburse them later. The reimbursement never came, but Keith said the insurance company was being difficult, and he'd handle it. Ashley forgot about it after a while. Now she knew exactly what that money paid for. Keith had used their shared savings, money they were supposed to be saving for their future and their future kids, to pay for a vasectomy that would make sure those kids never happened. Ashley's voice shook when she told me this. She said the financial deception made the emotional betrayal even worse. Her lawyer said this would help her case a lot. The judge would see that Keith not only lied about wanting kids, but also stole from their joint savings to make sure he couldn't have them. Ashley said her lawyer was confident she'd get a very good settlement now. 3 weeks after Christmas, I decided Tom and I should host a family dinner. I was nervous about it, but Tom said it was time to reclaim our normal life. We invited Ingrid, Roger, Kira, Sabina, and a few other relatives. Everyone showed up on time with food and wine. We set everything up in the dining room and sat down to eat. Nobody mentioned babies. Nobody made sympathetic faces at me. Nobody asked when Tom and I were planning to start a family. We just talked about normal things like work and movies and vacation plans. Kira told a funny story about her dog. Sabina complained about her new boss. Roger talked about wanting to buy a boat. It was the most normal family dinner we'd had in over a year. I looked around the table and felt this huge sense of relief wash over me. We were just being ourselves without all the weight of Keith's lies hanging over everything. Tom squeezed my hand under the table. After dinner, Ingrid hugged me and said she was glad things were getting back to normal. I said I was too. The next day, Ingrid called me sounding angry. She said Keith had shown up at her house that morning trying to turn her against me. He told her the divorce was my fault because I refused to support him when he needed family backing. He said if I'd just explained to Ashley that he was trying to help me with the baby pressure, none of this would have happened. Ingrid said she didn't let him finish. She told Keith he created this whole disaster through his own lies, and nobody else was responsible for the consequences. She said he lied to his wife for 5 years, used me as a shield, and stole from his own savings to pay for a secret vasectomy. She told him he needed to grow up and take responsibility like an adult, instead of trying to blame everyone else for his problems. Keith tried to argue, but Ingrid said she was done listening to his excuses. She told him to leave and not come back until he could admit what he did was wrong. Keith left without saying anything else. Ingrid said she was ashamed of him and didn't know how he'd turned into someone who could lie so easily. Ashley's divorce moved faster than anyone expected. Her lawyer called her 2 weeks after serving the papers. Keith's lawyer had reviewed all the evidence, including the insurance documents, the financial records, and the timeline of lies. The lawyer told Keith he had no defense, and going to trial would be a disaster. Everything would become public record. Everyone in town would be able to read about exactly what Keith did. The lawyer said Keith's best option was to settle quickly and quietly. Keith agreed within a day. Ashley got the house, most of their savings, and a clean break from 5 years of lies. The settlement papers said Keith admitted to fraud and deception during the marriage. Ashley signed everything as fast as she could. She called me the day it was finalized. Her voice sounded lighter than I'd heard it in months. She said she felt free for the first time since she got married. She was getting her life back, and Keith was out of it for good. I started seeing a therapist the following week. Tom suggested it after I spent an entire evening just being angry about everything Keith had done. I found someone who specialized in family issues and manipulation. The first session was hard. I had to explain the whole situation from the beginning. The therapist listened without interrupting, and then asked me how it felt to be used as a shield for someone else's lies. I said it made me feel worthless, like my life was just a tool for Keith to manipulate. The therapist helped me work through that feeling over the next several sessions. She explained that Keith's manipulation said everything about his character, and nothing about my worth. She said people who lie like that will use anyone available, and it wasn't personal even though it felt that way. The sessions helped me understand that I couldn't control what Keith did, but I could control how I responded to it. I learned to set better boundaries and recognize manipulation tactics. The anger started to fade into something more manageable. 2 months after Christmas, Ashley texted asking if we could meet for coffee again. I met her at the same coffee shop. She looked completely different from the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was styled, she wore a new outfit, and she smiled when she saw me. We ordered drinks and sat down. Ashley told me she'd started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but she was meeting people and having fun. She said she felt more hopeful about her future than she had in years. She could actually imagine having the life she wanted now, maybe with someone who wouldn't lie to her about something so important. Ashley thanked me for confronting Keith that night outside after Thanksgiving. She said if I hadn't pushed him to admit the truth, he never would have broken down. His breakdown made her suspicious enough to check the insurance records. Without that, she might have gone through with IVF and wasted even more time and money on Keith's lies. I told her I was glad she found out the truth even though it hurt. She said she was too. Keith sent me an email a few days later. The subject line said, "Please read this." I opened it even though I knew I shouldn't. The email was long, maybe 3 pages worth of text. Keith went through his whole reasoning for everything he'd done. He said he panicked when Ashley started talking about kids before they got married. He said he loved her but didn't want children and didn't know how to tell her. He said the vasectomy seemed like the easiest solution at the time. He said when the family started pressuring me about babies, he saw a chance to redirect that pressure and took it without thinking about how it would affect me. He said he was sorry for using me and sorry for lying to Ashley. But then the email turned into excuses. He said Ashley should have noticed something was wrong sooner. He said the family shouldn't have put so much pressure on everyone about grandkids. He said I should have supported him as family instead of exposing him. The whole thing was full of self-pity without any real accountability. I read it once and then deleted it without responding. I didn't owe Keith anything, not even acknowledgement. That same week, Tom and I had a serious conversation about our future. We were sitting on the couch after dinner when Tom asked if I actually wanted kids, or if we'd just been saying no because of the family pressure. I thought about it for a minute. I realized that before Keith's lies, I'd always assumed we'd have kids eventually. The pressure had made me push back against the idea, but the desire was still there underneath. I told Tom I did want kids someday, just on our own timeline without anyone else weighing in. Tom said he felt the same way. We started talking about what parenthood would actually look like for us. When we'd want to start trying, how many kids we might want, what kind of parents we wanted to be. The conversation felt exciting instead of stressful. We were making the decision for ourselves based on what we actually wanted, not reacting to family pressure or Keith's manipulation. Tom said we should wait another year or two to make sure we were really ready. I agreed. We had time to figure it out without anyone else's input. Over the next few months, something changed in how my family acted around me and Tom. Nobody asked about our plans anymore. Nobody made comments about biological clocks or pushed us toward decisions we weren't ready for. When we showed up at family dinners, people just talked to us like normal adults instead of treating us like we were missing something. Kira pulled me aside at Roger's birthday party in March and apologized for offering me her therapist's number last year. She said she felt terrible for believing Keith's lies without asking me directly. I told her it wasn't her fault. Keith had been convincing. We ended up laughing about how ridiculous the whole situation had been, how Keith thought he could maintain such a massive lie forever. She said the family learned a hard lesson about making assumptions, and I could see she meant it. Even Ingrid started acting different. She asked about my work projects and Tom's career goals without turning every conversation toward grandchildren. She'd catch herself sometimes, like she was about to say something about babies and would stop mid-sentence. I appreciated the effort even when it was awkward. 6 months after Christmas, Ashley texted me an invitation to a party at her new apartment. The divorce had been finalized that week, and she wanted to celebrate with the people who supported her. Tom and I showed up with a bottle of wine and found Ashley's place full of her friends and some family members. She looked completely different from the desperate woman who used to track ovulation cycles at family dinners. Her hair was shorter, she wore brighter colors, and she smiled like she meant it. Ashley pulled me into a hug and thanked me again for everything. She said the truth coming out was the best thing that could have happened to her, even though it hurt at the time. She told everyone at the party that she was grateful she found out about Keith's lies before she wasted any more years on him. She had plans now, real plans that didn't involve someone who'd been deceiving her. She was thinking about going back to the school, maybe traveling, figuring out what she actually wanted instead of chasing the life Keith had pretended to want with her. Tom and I stayed for a few hours, watching Ashley laugh with her friends and talk about her future. On the drive home, Tom said he was glad Ashley got out when she did. Keith moved to Denver in July. Nobody in the family heard about it directly from him. Sabina found out through a mutual friend that Keith had taken a job there and left town without telling anyone. Ingrid called me the day she found out, her voice tight. She said she'd tried to maintain some contact with Keith after everything happened, but he'd been avoiding her calls. Now he was gone and hadn't even said goodbye. She said she was disappointed in the son she raised, that she didn't recognize the person who could lie so completely to his wife and family. Roger got on the phone and said maybe it was better this way, that Keith needed to start over somewhere nobody knew what he'd done. The family agreed without really discussing it. Keith's name stopped coming up at gatherings. His empty chair at the table became normal. Ingrid kept a few photos of him on her shelf, but she didn't talk about him much. When people asked where he was, she'd say he moved for work and changed the subject quickly. Tom and I hosted Thanksgiving that year at our new house. We'd finally bought the place we wanted, closed on it in October. The whole family came over and Ingrid brought her famous sweet potato casserole. We were sitting around the table after dinner when Tom squeezed my hand under the table. I looked at him and he nodded. I stood up and tapped my glass with a fork until everyone got quiet. I told them Tom and I were pregnant, due in May. The room exploded with happy noise. Ingrid started crying immediately and came around the table to hug me. She said she was so happy for us and promised she'd be the kind of grandmother who respected our choices as parents. Roger shook Tom's hand and made a joke about finally getting to use all the baby stuff they'd saved in their attic. Kira squeezed my shoulder and said congratulations without any weird comments. Nobody said I told you so or mentioned the years of pressure they'd put on us. Nobody brought up Keith or the lies or the drama from last Christmas. The reaction was purely joyful, exactly what I'd wanted it to be. Ashley sent me a text later that night saying she'd heard the news from Sabina and was thrilled for me. She said she was happy we got to make the choice on our own terms. I believed her.